Hey, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas. It's Saturday morning, my friend, and you are listening to Light Talk.
And this is Ellen living the life on the tropical island of St. Bart's, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Having just returned from a lovely week in Durham, North Carolina, this is Dennis coming to you direct from New York City. You are listening to Light Talk.
And this is David coming to you from the beautiful Belmont Shore neighborhood of Long Beach, California, where it's raining today. It's really bizarre. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers
And Sister.
That's right, Ellen. Welcome, everyone, to episode 464. And today we have a special guest with us today, television director Eric Siegel. How you doing, Eric?
I'm great, thank you. I'm so honored that you folks would have me here. I'm such a fan of the podcast, and I'm so looking forward to talking with you folks.
Wow, get over it. We're not that impressive. We know that anyway. Where are you calling from today, Eric?
I'm coming to you from the home office in Manhattan's beautiful Upper West Side at 108th Street and Broadway.
Oh.
That's nice. Well, I hear that you guys are going to be like getting new property taxes out there for all the rich people.
There's every chance, but this is part of what living in the big city is, and if you don't like it, well, you can lump it.
You can make up for it going to the free grocery store.
We also need to check in and see if, like Dennis size, Eric has a yacht.
I was prepared for this question. I leave all of the nautical navigation to my good friend Ron DeMarias, who has a lovely boat that he goes out on. But no, I am a New York landlubber.
All right. Well, that's good to know. So let's get started. And for our listeners who may not know about Eric, Dennis, could you please give our listeners a little lesson?
With pleasure. Eric Siegel is a veteran television and film director, art director, production scenic designer, specializing in a comprehensive approach to the creative direction and technical execution of programming and entertainment of all kinds.
Wow, that sounds impressive.
In a career spanning over 40 years, he has provided creative and technical leadership to clients in the United States, Asia, and the Middle East, and for the world's most prestigious program producers, including ABC, CBS, NBC, PBS, HBO, and the MSG television network. Eric has been a director of, or a contributing director to, the widest possible variety of live television broadcasting, including papal visits, election nights, town hall meetings, political debates, conventions, primetime news magazines, morning shows, Sunday roundtables, musical performances, evening and late night news, and more special events than he dares to remember. His work as a director, art director, and production designer has been recognized with 11 Emmy Awards and the DuPont Columbia Award, the Peabody Award, a Christopher Award, the Cine Golden Eagle, and over 25 Broadcast Designers Association Awards. In full transparency, I must also reveal that Eric is a dear friend of mine, and we've collaborated on many projects for several decades, and I don't think there was one that I wasn't proud of. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Thank you for having me.
You must have pulled our brother Dennis's butt out of the fire many times, Eric. Is that true?
I'm afraid it's rather the reverse, but we're always looking out for one another, which after all is what we're hired to do.
Just kicking it off, you and I have been friends for years, but I don't really know how you started. What inspired you as a young Eric to become a director for television?
Well, I was always a visual kid. I mean, I loved drawing and comic books, which I eventually realized were essentially storyboards. I liked taking photographs and making little 8mm films with our family's Bell and Howell movie camera, and editing in my room, I loved what we would now call classic films. And I grew up fascinated by, of all things, TV variety specials. That was my favorite kind of television. especially because I was an avid reader of the credits, those that were directed by the legendary Dwight Hemian, who I'm sure all of us know who Dwight Hemian was and who his partner Gary Smith was, and so on and so forth. But I would be, whereas other people would be watching baseball games on television, I would be talking about that Baryshnikov on Broadway special that aired last night. And I was just endlessly fascinated by all of the variety shows of the day, the Sonny and Cher show and all of the specials and Motown's TCB. I just loved all of that and couldn't wait to do that. If only variety had stayed around by the time I had gotten out of college.
Did you grow up in New York?
I grew up in New York, and I went to New York University to the School of the Arts before it was the Tisch School of the Arts. It was a great experience, and the television department, I was an undergraduate television student, was in a tiny little building on the southeastern corner of Washington Square where we had a couple of black and white studios, and that was how I got my start of my TV education.
Yeah, I also went to NYU before the Tisch School of the Arts, and I was unfortunately an English major at the Washington Square College of Arts and Sciences because that was about as close as you could get in those days, theater and English.
It was a great experience. Our equipment was positively primitive, hand-me-downs, but you know something? It made it a lot better for us because it enabled us to do things like focus on story and focus on concept without, I think I was in my senior year before we did any projects that actually used a color television camera. And to do those, we would go downtown to the municipal building and we would get to use the studios of WNYC TV 31 to do color productions there. And, we did dramas and we did music pieces and so on and so forth. It was really doing television with stone knives and bearskins, as we were joking before, but it was great training.
And now it's all so sophisticated.
It is. Well, of course, now the means of production are right on our desktops. That's been a big game changer, but I'm sure we'll get into talking about that. I mean, Dennis, what you probably didn't know is that, I was actually an intern at Good Morning America when it was part of the entertainment division at ABC. And that was how I got my first exposure to real broadcast television. I was an intern there on and off for 2 years for my junior and senior year. And that was how I got my start. Internships are absolutely essential. And mine was the springboard for my entire career. In the old days, the internships were more available because you didn't have to be paid. Eventually in New York, you had to be paid to be an intern. But in those days, the internship was technically a course, and you had to pay for the course, like you paid for all the other credits of the classes you took. My father used to say that he was never more proud of anything that I did than working for years for free before I actually worked for years to get paid.
It's interesting because internships seem to have gone the way of the dodo bird, and although they're very useful and active, I don't know why they're not used more for students. In our Young Designers series, Hannah Kerman talked about the fact that right out of high school, she went for internships with Full Flood. And while she was going to Carnegie Mellon, she had internships, which eventually led to her working at Full Flood and eventually led to her getting an Emmy Award for the Grammys. I mean, talk about a trajectory. And even at LDG, we've had plenty of lighting directors who are currently senior people who started out as interns.
It was absolutely essential, and it was also the accident by which I got my first job. I worked in the booking department where they booked all the guests for Good Morning America, and I worked alongside the lady who booked all the travel and hotels. And one summer, she just had a meltdown and quit in a huff. And they came to me and they said, "Kid, have you been paying close attention to how she does her job?" And I said, "Well, yes, sir." And they said, "Good, you're going to do it for the summer." And as luck would have it, her desk was right across the aisle from the production offices where all the assistant directors and the production associates and the production coordinators hung out. And that just gave me the opportunity to hang with those people and learn everything I could about how the show was done.
But you didn't go to school saying, what I really want to do is direct. I mean, you must have had some other plan, or you were just kind of, hoping to find guidance?
Well, at NYU, you got to do every position. Some days you were a camera person. Some day you were hammering a set together. Oddly enough, the crew position that I loved most was working as the lighting person for the other students' projects. And I thought, wow, this is fun. I'm going to possibly go and do this. Until, of course, the very first day that I was allowed to visit the control room of Good Morning America, and watching the director of the show, a very, very charismatic fellow named Jan Rifkinson, after watching him do 2 hours of Good Morning America Live, there was only one chair from that moment on that I decided I ever wanted to sit in. And that's what really, set me on my path.
Well, you couldn't have watched a better director. He was wonderful, even though he never wore socks.
He never wore socks, even in the winter. And he used to have a motorcycle, and he drove up to ABC in his motorcycle, which they let him into the loading dock, and he parked it on the loading dock and walked right into the control room. He was an amazing director. He had been at CBS before, and he was extremely knowledgeable about, it seemed, every possible aspect of how the production went together and so on and so forth. And of course, Good Morning America was a brand new animal in those days for ABC. And so to have the opportunity to just get up early in the morning any day that I wanted and sneak into the Good Morning America control room was just the most invaluable learning experience a kid could have.
So you get your degree at NYU, then what?
Then I was very, very lucky because, as I said, I had worked on and off for ABC for Good Morning America as an intern, and then paid occasionally. And they hired me right out of college. They hired me right out of college to work as the production coordinator on the show. And the production coordinators in those days, we researched footage. We handled all the tape that went onto the show. We were involved in the editing. And of course, being involved in editing is such amazing training for a director, because directing is essentially live editing, at least in live television. And so it put me in the same room with all of the Directors Guild of America people on the show. And in those days, I worked for various directors there. Duke Struck was the director who followed Jan. And then after Duke was Don Roy King, who was a great mentor to me. And one day, Don asked me just casually, so whose job around here do you want? And I said, I want yours. And he said, well, you can't have it, but I'll do this best as I can for you. And he gave me the first open production associate position, which was how, of course, I got into the Directors Guild. And so that was really how I sort of got my start, on the DGA path. Good Morning America was an amazing show at the time because you got to see every kind of broadcast. There was an Oscar broadcast, a Super Bowl broadcast. There was breaking news, when Anwar Sadat was assassinated. Every kind of thing that you could possibly imagine was covered on Good Morning America, and you got to see it all. And of course, it was all manually produced. And what I mean by that is we really didn't have any computers. We didn't even have a copying machine at the studio in those days. And as the PA, it was my job to handwrite all the copy changes into the many scripts that had to be updated live while we were on the air, and timing the show and working with the producers. It was a fantastic experience.
Not to date you, but didn't Good Morning America recently celebrate its 50th anniversary?
They certainly did. It's always wonderful and heartbreaking at the same time when I watch these anniversary broadcasts, because this is just the kind of person I am. I'm always seeing who's not there anymore. I'm always seeing all the people that we loved and that I loved and grew up with, who are now, some of them, no longer with us. Although sometimes I see people who are brought back, and I'm like, gee, I think I'm the only person who knows who Margaret Osmer and Steve Bell are, on that set. So it's always fascinating to me to watch those shows, and I never, ever forget my early days there. It's kind of, Dennis is familiar with the ABC studios now at 7 Hudson Square, And I find it very ironic because they have large blow-up photographs all around the technical studios floor that help you find your way, because the place is real difficult to find your way around. And the control room that I direct in on Sundays, when I do ABC's Sunday with This Week with George Stephanopoulos show, has a big photo of David Hartman right outside the control room. And I'm thinking, I started my career walking past David Hartman on the way to the studio, and now in the waning days of my career, I'm walking past David Hartman on my way to the studio.
Bookends. Very nice. Was he the original host?
David was the first host of Good Morning America. Originally, his co-host was a lovely and very smart lady named Nancy Dussault. And then Nancy Dussault gave way to Sandy Hill and eventually Joan London, who we all love and loved. But they were the first hosts of the show.
So television, film, theater, what's your oyster?
Well, I've been lucky in that I've sort of gotten to indulge myself and do it all. I always believe that the look of a program's a kind of an organism in which every part of it's connected to the DNA of another part. So at some point, after I started directing and getting hired as a director, I looked for small projects which I could just have as great a say as possible over the style, the sound, the blocking, and the overall creative direction of the show. And then happily, people responded well. And so eventually they started to hire me for just that ability to create a overall look and feel for the production itself. Later, and after I left the staff of ABC, I did start to work with a small theater company, and I loved working with actors and creating a space for them where they could create a character and so on and so forth. And I also, through great luck, have gotten to work with a wonderful choreographer. Her name is Jodie Oberfelder, and I've worked with her on several dance films and also creating video elements for her stage productions. And so I've just, live television is always my first love. About the only thing that I've never done that I probably burned to do would be perhaps to direct an opera at the Met. I don't mean the opera itself, because I don't think I'm qualified to do that, but I just have been in love with the Met Opera productions for years. So Metropolitan Opera, if you're out there and if you want a director who's willing to work for you cheap, I'm your man.
I'm an opera lighting designer. You may want to stay away from opera. I'm just giving you
I've been
the
such
Met's
a fan.
great.
I've been such a fan of the Met HD productions and of the work of people like Matthew Diamond and the work they've done over the years. I just can't get enough of them.
Speaking of opera and theater and all that, you've done theater, you've done television broadcasts, and you've done film. And in film, we all know that the lighting designer is really the cinematographer of the film.
Mm-hmm.
In theater, the lighting designer is called the lighting designer. And in television, usually the lighting designer is the lighting director. Could you please tell what the difference is when you're working in live broadcast, working with a lighting director, versus theater, where you're working with a lighting designer, versus film, where you're working with a cinematographer?
Well, I can say that when you work in film, and now even when you work in video, you're working with a DP, because the television cameras now that we use in the field are of such incredible quality that those two fields have started to merge. And in fact, cinematographers, famous ones like, Roger Deakins and so on and so forth, who used to work exclusively in film, now have to work with digital cinema cameras. But I relate to all of them as the same. To me, if you ever walk onto, whether it's a stage set or a film set or a television studio set with the lights off, you immediately understand what the role of the lighting designer is. And now, especially in television, when you walk into studios, and as Dennis could tell you, all the surfaces are blank because there really is no scenic, so to speak, or not nearly as much scenic as there was. The role of a lighting director is just key. It's their job, and I rely upon them to bring that space to life. Otherwise, it's just a room with the fluorescents on, And so I'm not saying that I don't ever come in with an idea or with a concept, and especially since I do work in production design and I do scenic design, I always come in with a visual or a reference of how I think, something should look. But, it's the lighting designer and I'm not trying to shine you folks. I'm saying the lighting designer is the person who you rely on to make it all come alive. And if there was one big difference between the experiences, I would say that in television, the focus on the face is so much greater and so much more important than any other visual medium. In television, I always say, if somebody says to me, what do you focus on? What's the job of TV lighting? I always say, well, the first thing you work on is the face, and then you work on the faces some more, and then you perfect the face. And if there's time, it would be good if the set looked good. But in television, the close-up is everything. It doesn't matter whether it's a big award show or a massive set or a concert or whatever. No, well, you've heard the old adage, no one goes home from a Broadway musical humming the set. In TV, it's all about the face. And that's one of the reasons I've been so lucky, is all the lighting directors I've worked with, been lucky enough to work with in my life, have understood that,
When you get a new project, do you get to pick, Dennis, or does somebody get assigned to you?
I have been lucky enough that on the projects that I've worked on, usually I'm asked to put together or make the recommendations for most of the team members. Of course, when you come into another person's facility or another studio facility, you might, of course, understand that you're going to be working with their lighting person. What I've tried to do, and Dennis and I have worked on a lot of successful projects in which, for example, like the PBS NewsHour, we did all the sets for the PBS NewsHour, and they had good lighting people there. But I usually say, let's get it started with my own lighting designer who will work with me just to get the look of it, going. And then eventually we might hand off to the studio's lighting designer who's going to do the day in and day out. But I've been blessed to be able to usually specify who I think should work on the project. So I've just been lucky that way.
And what's the process? What do you say? Hi, Dennis, we're going to do this, and here's what I want it to look like? Or
I call Dennis up and I say, "Are we still friends?" And he says, "Yes." And right. He said, "Yes." I said, "Okay, I have something new and fun to hurt you with," and then I take him through it and so on and so forth. If I'm lucky, if we're both lucky, the start date is very far away, because I'm a big believer in bringing the lighting people on early in the design. I like to also, as Dennis knows, I don't like to usually see cameras on sets. I don't like to see instruments on sets if I can avoid it. So I'm a big believer in trying to integrate the lighting wherever possible, into the actual set itself, so that we're not looking at, we've all seen beautiful television studios before they were lit, which have these magnificent ceiling pieces, and then before you know it, the ceiling pieces is obscured because it wasn't designed for the lights. So I'll often say to Dennis, "Listen, this is my idea for the set. If I put this thing here and that thing there, can we hide the lights inside that? Is that going to hurt you, or will you be able to work with that?" And he'll say, "Well, if it were a little lower or a little wider or a little bigger, or if we use these fixtures, we can show these fixtures, but we'll make them look like they're part of the set and they belong there." And that's how the conversation begins, and that's how I like to work.
So you guys have like your own well-established vocabulary that you just sort of shorthand?
I don't think I'm smart enough to. I mean, I can joke around with Dennis and try to talk his language and say, heat up kitchen 7 or put a baby on that pigeon, but I don't know what I'm talking about.
Put a baby on the pigeon? Wait, what sort of thing are you running there? You're having like animal acts? What's going on? Of children and animals?
Exactly. I have no.
God.
I learned long ago that the best way to piss somebody off is to try and out jargon them. Dennis has all sorts of his own shorthand and so on and so forth. And so I just say what we're trying to do, and I let him figure out the instrumentation and so on and so forth. The approach, what's going to be a moving light. Also, I'm really not qualified on a limited budget to say what the best mixture of fixtures in a studio is to be. I don't go in and say, oh, it has to be 100 moving lights, or it has to be 100 pars, or 100 licos, or whatever. I just say, well, my job is to tell Dennis where the people are going to be, what direction they're going to look in, how I'm going to shoot them, how the areas of the studio may interrelate, how quickly we might go from one thing to another thing, and then let him figure out the best way to provide practical, workable, directable, shootable coverage. Because a lot of our shows are live, and so it's not just like we're not doing setups here. We have to be able to go from one thing to the other, to the other, to the other fast and make it look good. And to your point earlier, make it so that when we leave and we watch the show being done by the local crew, that it's achievable, that we don't leave them with some mess that they can't figure out how to do.
One of the things I should point out, Eric has glossed over his process a little bit and made it sound very simplified, but I have worked with hundreds and hundreds of directors, and he's one of the very few that I can honestly say, when you go into the studio to camera block, it is the way he says it. Eric is one of the few directors who pre-vises everything and has all of his camera angles all determined in advance, where they're going to be buried in the set, how the angles are going to work, and has CAD programs that shows his clients exactly how the thing is going to look before anything happens. And I'll always say to him, yeah, we're going to have to move the lights. We're going to have to do this. And it usually never happens because he thinks everything out to the nth degree beforehand. And that makes him a great director to work with. That being said, how did you establish that, Eric? I mean, your previs work is exceptional.
Well, I'm very, very into technology. Always have been. I'm aware of the danger of it because sometimes, and I say this to young directors, you can get too focused on learning technology and I mean, we're in a technical business, but you don't want the technology to derail your creative process. But whether it's a pencil and a pad, or as we used to make it, actual foam core models of sets, pre-visualization to me, television's too expensive to just go in and start having the quickest way to lose a stage crew is to build the set wrong and then expect these guys to horse 150-pound things around for days on end while you try and figure out how the thing should have been designed. So for me, the great revolution in the business since my college days has been the ability to put tools on our desktops that enable us to pre-visualize things. I am a big fan and an avid user of Cinema 4D, which is a software program that many of you, I'm sure, have talked about on the podcast. And it's enabled us to design with blocking, fantastic control for making shooting plans. I have a whole collection of rigged cameras in my Cinema 4D library now that allows me to. I mean, one of the first things I do when I take on a project is I call the production manager and I say, what lenses do we have in the studio? And then before and just as we start, we block everything out, where people are going to be sitting, what the camera's lensing is going to be, and so on and so forth. It helps us with shop drafting. And it frankly helps because you can create a photorealistic picture for the client. I mean, success to me is when the client says, it just looks like the picture. And very often, and when the client says, we know it's going to look different, I'll say, let me show you some before and afters from previous projects, and I'm going to pop them up real quick, and you tell me which is the rendering, and you tell me which is the actual shot. And sometimes it takes them a few seconds. It's a fabulous tool. And the thing is, Dennis is giving me more credit than I deserve for not changing my mind once I'm in the actual studio, because I do that, even though he's gracious in saying that I don't. But when I go in and my act is together, that's what gives us the freedom to make changes. You have to change, you have to start from somewhere. There's that old saying, you can't steer a parked car. You have to have a plan, a moving plan first before you can go into a different direction. And that, for me, is what all of this is about, is being able to go in with an idea as to what it's going to look like and what can be improved and what will work and what doesn't work.
Talking about technology, I've been watching the Olympics this past week, which is, I love the Olympics. I think it's great. But they're now using drones a lot, the cameras. It is so fascinating to see downhill racing with a drone camera behind the athlete. My wife, Lori, we were watching it. And, I hadn't seen the Olympics in about 5 or 6 years. So this was before they were starting to use drones. And it was like, she was freaking out. She said, this is an amazing experience to actually go down the hill with the athlete at the same speed, which is absolutely amazing. And obviously they've been using drones a lot. We talked on the show about adolescents. They use a lot of drones during that and stuff like that. This technology with drone cameras now, are you starting to use that, or do you see possibilities where that may expand? Because obviously you've got these little things with propellers, so you can't. It's kind of a dangerous thing. Could be dangerous.
This is the constant evolution of what we do. It was to use a handheld camera on a show in a studio used to be a big deal. And then I did a pilot as an AD for Don Roy King in Los Angeles when I first lived out in Hollywood. And Don was one of the first people to use a Steadicam on a musical pilot. But of course, in those days, the Steadicams were wired. And so for television, because they weren't carrying self-contained film cameras. And Don was just a master at figuring out how to pre-cable the studio so that he would do these massive oneers on the Steadicam and unwind his cable at the same time. So when the camera pulled out of the scene, he wouldn't be seeing his cable. And then, of course, we got into jibs, because if you remember, when we all started in television, a crane was operated by 3 people. Like you see on Saturday Night Live, a Chapman crane with a guy sitting on and a guy operating the arm and another person driving the base. And then suddenly we had Jimmy jibs. Right now, if you want to do massive sweeping, some massive sweeping, highly controlled outdoor shots 5-10 years ago, even as recently as when I did a Papal Mass in Washington, I had this magnificent shot that I wanted to do that I designed, but we needed to use a techno crane, which is a computerized crane with a telescoping arm to get the shot. If I were to go back and do that shot now, and the Secret Service were to allow me to use a drone, that shot would have absolutely been done with a drone. As far as using them in the studio, until they become completely silent, I don't think, in fact, there's been some talk about how on some of the Olympic events you can sort of hear the whir of the drones.
Oh, yeah, you can.
But on a sporting event, I don't actually think that hurts. I mean, for sports, they're just incredible. There was a great director named Larry Kam. May he rest in peace. And one of the things that Larry Kam, used to say about his directing job as a sports director was to give the viewer the best seat in the house, to give them the view that no one else could have. And that's always been, stayed with me. And these cameras are unbelievable. The images keep getting incredibly higher in quality to where now you can shoot 4K. They can stay up in the air longer on less batteries, and they can repeat their moves with precision through the tiniest of spaces. It's absolutely great and absolutely exciting as long as you are using it for something that's justified in telling the story.
Right. Appropriate, right?
Because we've all seen plenty of Steadicam work in our time, and we're like, why are we on the Steadicam for that shot? Right. So it has to be a shot that serves the story. That's the most important thing.
So what piece of technology would you like to see develop that would make your job, more expansive, more creative?
That's very, very hard to say. In the studio and for multi-camera environments, things that are smaller and lighter and more concealable are for me. I mean, if I could fantasize and create a technology that doesn't exist, it would be a camera that could shoot through an LED wall, or an LED wall that could have a camera embedded in it. And Dennis knows, because he's heard me say this 1,000 times, producers always want to have the presenter or the anchor turn to the wall to interview somebody in the screen, but the walls are massive, and you can't get the camera usually in a perfect shot to get a good two-eye close-up of the anchor or the interviewer. So for me, what I crave more than anything is the ability to conceal a high-quality camera that could get me a shot of the anchor looking at any of the screens in the studio when they turn up stage to get a really good close-up of them. And I guess if they could put one in an iPhone, eventually they'll figure out how to put one in a tile
Right,
of a video
exactly.
wall.
Yeah.
You could embed GoPros in there easily, you know?
That would be ingenious. I never thought about that, but with all of the video walls everywhere, to find some way to shoot with the wall would be incredible.
Through them.
Concealing cameras exactly. There used to be a guy, he's not with us anymore, named Dale Seehey, who used to kind of invent all these weird things. And I think he did something once for The Daily Show, or maybe it was the Colbert Report, where actually he had a camera concealed in a bookcase pointing downwards, and a little mirror would flip open, and he would shoot into the mirror the same way that you guys direct lights using mirrors on the bottom of the instrument. He did this for a camera, and it was a one shot, but it was absolutely a perfect way. I would sit there sometimes and look at the show like, where are they getting that shot from? How are they making that shot happen? Because I don't see the cameras. I hate to see cameras on air, so that's just my bugaboo.
Then you wouldn't like the Met because they have a big one the night they do those HD broadcasts. And there's one that runs across the front of the stage and one that runs across a wire, or they walk right out to the face. So you might not like that so much.
Yeah, I'm a frequent Met goer. And so my wife and I, we sort of try to avoid the nights when the opera is being covered. Projection is such a big part of the Metropolitan Opera now that we also sort of avoid that first tier in the center, because we don't want to be sitting right above the projectors, because we find the projectors sometimes protrude so far out that you can't see past them. So
interesting.
In addition to the future of technology, how do you envision the role of the actual television director evolving as the business keeps changing?
Well, it depends, I think. For me, it depends a lot on which area of the business. I've spent a lot of years in television news, obviously, and in television news production, the trend is towards automation, and that's inescapable, and it saddens me. The processes are always changing. They're never going to be done the same way that we learn to love and to do things. I just have to sort of console myself in believing that there's always going to be a need for a human who can listen and think and figure out the best way to tell a story. But for the daily grind in and out of, for example, television news production, most programs, and by that I don't mean a Good Morning America or a Today Show or some of the election night specials, that's not going to ever be automated completely. But a lot of television news is going to be automated. And I'm afraid that the day will come where the system will just monitor who's speaking and cut to them. And if there's two people speaking, they'll put them up in two boxes. But it won't be the sort of kind of visual relationships and things that I used to pride myself on. When I used to do the evening news with Peter Jennings, rest in peace, or Diane Sawyer or Charlie Gibson, one of the things I loved to do was go up to the control room earlier and talk to the cameramen who were out in the field, so that if they were on the site of a hurricane or the site of a fire or a site of some place that had gone through a disaster, I would tell them to get your camera off the tripod because we're going to start walking around. I'm going to want to see with the correspondent what's in that rubble field that's behind you there. But I think a lot of those days are gone because, frankly, you just don't have the time anymore before the show. The director's busy in the control room with the computer console, doing what we call coding the show, literally programming the shots that he or she is going to be using in the computer. And it's not that I don't think that has its place, but as a director, it robbed me of the time that I liked to spend working with the camera people. That's what I like doing. I like working with the camera people, with the audio people, with the technical director. And once that became not the paradigm that we were going to using, a lot of it seek to hold my interest.
So what is the most challenging project you ever did?
Well, I guess it depends. I mean, projects can be challenging in two ways. One of the most challenging but fun projects I ever did was the late Pope Francis's Papal Mass. He did a canonization mass at the Washington National Cathedral. And that was very, very challenging because you have to serve the liturgy, you have to serve the actual mass itself, the places and the various locations that we were shooting. They didn't want him to see the cameras or be distracted by the cameras, so we had to conceal the cameras. We had about 23 cameras in all, but it was just a magical day, you know, of music and choirs, and the ceremony was so solemn. So that was a very, very challenging production, and just to figure out how we were going to religiously and invisibly cover an event like that in a very, very moving way. A different difficult project for me, but which also ended up being very happy, was back in, I think it was 1999 or 1998, ABC News Nightline produced 8-hour-long episodes of a series they called Brave New World. And the stories that they were tackling were very diverse, like the nature of time and human cloning and man versus machine. They even did a show on string theory. And so we were struggling with all sorts of ideas. How do we unify the series? And then we came up with this, I guess for network television, almost ridiculous notion of doing the opening titles as a series of modern dance pieces, you know, each of which would evoke one of the topics. And that was my first association with my wonderful choreographer friend, Jody Oberfelder. And we had so much fun with it once we came up with this idea. We even got Dame Dianna Rigg to read a verse from the Tempest that began the program.
Oh, that's great.
And we got, if for those of your listeners who might be familiar with They Might Be Giants, the band They Might Be Giants.
Yeah, sure.
John Flansburgh, did the music for it. It was a great project. And obviously, it's near and dear to me. I won my first Emmys for that project. So those are two different types. They're both different challenges. You're sitting there trying to figure out how to serve the material best. I mean, a Papal Mass for me is ideal because my dirty little secret is that although I love doing shows with all the talent I've been blessed to do shows with and the producers that I've been blessed to work with, I love doing pool work. Because when I do pool work or world feed work, I guess I don't know if everybody understands what pool and world feed is. That's when you're directing the kind of core coverage that other networks will put their own talent on top of and will wrap in their own unilateral coverage. But I like doing the raw event itself because then it's sort of, there's no talent to worry about. There's no script to worry about. There's no real producing to worry about once the event is put together. And a team like Phil, like I'll work with a producer like Phil Olanji, who's a great friend. And then it's just me and my 23 cameras and my camera people and the Holy Father conducting Mass. And it's just such a pleasure because you get to tell a story. You get to reveal things to the audience that they never could see. You get to go from the intimate to the majestic, and I learned a lot of lessons on that project. It was a real good teaching project for me, too.
I don't know, Eric. You talk about the Pope, you talk about Dianna Rigg. And as a young boy watching the Avengers, that would have been a tough choice.
I don't want to make you too jealous. I actually only spoke to Dame Dianna over the phone. She had she came into our London bureau to do the voiceover. And I don't mind giving you the funny preamble to that, which is that she wasn't our first choice. Our first choice was Marianne Faithfull, who had done an album in which she had done some Shakespearean reading. And I just thought, okay, we have to have Marianne Faithfull. And we booked her. And we came in early. And when I arrived and I got on the phone with the engineer who was in the recording studio, I said, are we ready to go? And he goes, well, I don't think we're going to be recording today. And I said, why? And he goes, well, Marianne's just arrived and she's pissed. And as you probably know from your work in overseas, he didn't mean she was angry. he meant she was pissed, as the British say.
Yes.
And so she was
intoxicated.
She was not able to do the work. And so I went back up to the office and I said to the producer, Sarah, I said, we got to get somebody else. And she's like, let me see who I could call. And then she comes back to me a half an hour later. She goes, do you think Dianna Rigg's voice would work? And I'm like,
my God.
Would it work? And then, of course, we got her on the phone, and she was so charming. And she said to me, I was so embarrassed. She said to me, well, how would you like me to read this? And I said, if you think that I am going to tell you how to deliver a line from The Tempest, I said, why don't you do it any way that you like, and we'll pick from the three that you think are best.
That's an awesome story.
That's fascinating.
Yes.
What else did you win your 11 Emmys for?
Well, Emmys are both a wonderful and a sort of sore subject with me. Dennis and I have traded a few emails on this because the News and Documentary Emmys Committee has been changing the requirements for eligibility back and forth and like a pendulum over the years. So the first two Emmys that I won are near and dear to my heart because they were won in craft categories. Art direction was one and directing was the other. In subsequent years, they stopped actually giving out a craft category for director, so directors were awarded Emmys as part of the team. And so there were many broadcasts that, for which I was part of a great team, like Peter Jennings broadcasting from California during the fires and so on and so forth. In fact, last year, in the most recent Emmy year, they didn't have a category for scenic design for news. And when I called them up and said, why, they said, well, we were just not getting enough entries, Or in some years they would say, well, the same people were entering every year. None of which made sense to me. And in fact, I think I'm correct in this year, wasn't lighting combined with another category this year?
Yes. They've been combining everything into, as you say, the team award.
So getting recognized in a craft field, to me, was always the height of recognition. And I was very, very lucky to be able to get my first ones for the actual craft in which I worked, which was very, very meaningful. Not that it wasn't meaningful to be part of great winning teams over the years.
I have an easy question for you. The things you've worked on, town halls, conventions, the papal visit, how difficult have these projects been given the security requirements?
It's funny. We've worked... Dennis, myself, I'm sure you folks too, we worked around the Secret Service for so many years that they're almost invisible to us. We sort of know what their requirements are. We factor them in the beginning. We roll with the punches. I will say that the last event that I did that had heavy Secret Service presence was the Trump inaugural in the Trump 2025 inaugural, which famously actually the inaugural parade, which was my component of it, didn't happen because of the severe cold. But that particular event, the Secret Service requirements were so stringent and less coordinated than in previous years, to the point where we were having to move massive camera setups that we had gotten approval for and having to relocate them the night before the inauguration, just because somebody at the last moment decided that 40-foot Musco truck can't be there. You don't actually move a 60-foot ladder truck 25 feet willy-nilly, Or if you do, sometimes, because I've done a lot of work in Washington, I lived in Washington for 4 years, sometimes if you want that shot of the limo coming up from Capitol Hill and then making the turn past the Treasury building towards the White House, there really is only one place you can put that camera. And when the service says you have to move it, boy, it's a lot of negotiation in the cold, dark night.
You were, if I remember correctly, one of the pool directors. You and Rhonda Morales did the Democratic convention in Chicago.
No, we did
year.
we did the Republican. I don't mean to correct you, but Ron did the.
Oh, that's
Ron
right.
Did the,
that's right.
Yeah, Ron actually directed the coverage. I sort of came on as a kind of separate person there. My job, and it was enormous fun because we were doing something we had never done before, was Ron came up with this idea of wanting to use this track cam that was like 235 feet long in its travel, but it was facing the stage, and we wanted to augment the scenic on the stage with augmented reality scenic elements, which basically quadrupled the width of the stage. The stage was designed by the wonderful Jim Fenhagen, who I've been blessed to work with many times. But we were expanding his design virtually all the way out to the left and right sides. And so we had to figure out a way to track that camera and feed all of those screens. And that was my area of responsibility for that project. And like I say, I'm not always the director on a show. Sometimes I'm just a contributing director or a helping director. And I love those types of collaborations too, because it took us a long time. It was up until the last 36 hours before we actually had specific tracking technology to do that augmented reality because of the specific difficulties and the specific type of shot that Ron was looking to achieve.
Flipping this totally around because the band is coming in and they're going to set up to play us off. What advice would you give to someone, a young person who wants to be a TV director?
Well, as I sort of alluded to before, even though it's a technical business, I would say to them, do not be too focused on learning technology. I think instead the best thing you can do is to focus on absorbing everything you possibly can that has gone before you in film and music and art and TV, not to copy it, but to make it a part of you, because your career is going to be based on you establishing your own sense of visual grammar. I don't know if the name Jonathan Miller will mean anything to you folks. He was a director of theater and television and documentaries. He was a great director.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, Jonathan Miller used to say, and I've always taken this to heart, that over like his 40 or 50 years of reading and wishing and thinking and looking at things and keeping his eye open, that he knew he'd forgotten at least 80% of everything he'd ever seen or experienced. But he knew that somewhere inside him it was all there, and that under the pressure of an actual occasion, something about from that he'd learned would deliver itself. And so if all you are is somebody who knows how the switcher works, or how the camera works, or what software works, when it comes time for you to make a creative solution, you're not going to have that reservoir of understanding to bring it up. And that's always, for me, what has worked. I always say to myself, I'm always worried that I'm never going to come up with the solution for something. I'm always frightened that I won't come up with the answer. And then somehow, under the pressure of the situation, something that I saw, something that I thought, something that made me think of something else delivered itself. So I would say, Dennis, to what to do if you want to be an aspiring director, you got to become a sponge, and you got to absorb as much of the culture and the history as you can, not to imitate it, but so that you'll understand it and choose from it or depart from it or compose two pieces of it, to, put it together in ways it's never been put together before. The other thing that's so important is mentors. I was very, very blessed. Eric Shapiro at CBS News, who I didn't get a chance to mention, was one of my great mentors. Roger Goodman was one of my great mentors. He's also one of my great tour mentors, and Dennis will know what that means about. But I say that with a kind of perverse love. And Don Roy King of Saturday Night Live fame and so on and so forth. These were all great mentors, and without mentors, it's really, really tough.
Yeah,
it's
isn't
really
that the way
tough.
it is, though? It's like teaching, and then you become a mentor. It's just this cycle of life. It's amazing. It really is beautiful. Eric, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, please,
And
thank you.
We knew you'd
great.
be very personable with a sense of humor since you've had to work with Dennis all these years, right? So that was...
I'll embarrass him in front of his peers. It's been a real pleasure. And as Dennis will tell you, I wasn't always like this, I started out a real hardhead. The stories that I probably would tell, but which I'm often embarrassed to tell, are, frankly, I behaved in a lot of bad ways in the bad old days of television, and it takes a long time to rehab a bad reputation. And I managed to, in the first 5 or 6 years of my career out of college, I managed to piss off a lot of people. It took me it took me a good 2 decades to get told by people like Dennis, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do this. And then eventually you learn that you get more out of people through better techniques.
Yeah.
You know?
I think we all have that story. It's called learning. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And having good mentors, like you said.
Brandon Tartikoff used to say, worry about your character and your reputation will take care of itself. And he was certainly right about that.
There you go. Well, thanks again, Eric.
Oh, my pleasure.
Well, the rocking sounds of the Luminoids tell us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can hear our show on just about every podcast site out there. Check out our website at lighttalk.org and be sure to follow us on Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy or any statements or opinions made on this podcast. However,
if you do decide to litigate, you will have to deal with me, Snoot from the Snoot Group. And don't get it twisted. Just because I married one of these losers does not mean I will go easy on you. So don't with me.
Today, Light Talk is coming to you from the beautiful Belmont Shore neighborhood of Long Beach, California, from the tropical paradise St. Bart's, from the Lone Star State, and from 2 sites in the entertainment capital of the world, New York City.
be sure to join us next week when we dive into more lighting shenanigans and serve up a fresh, piping hot casserole of nonsense.
Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.